Okay, wonderful students. Now that you've done all of your brainstorming, your organizing, your outlining, now you're ready to write your rough draft. And specifically what I've done for you here on this handout is I've given you basically almost a checklist of what you need to include in order to expand that outline into a full-blown rough draft. Now keep in mind we are typing in MLA format, and specifically you want to make sure that you have a creative title. Remember, I got to read 120 of these, so the more interesting your title, the better off we're going to be. Okay. Now, I've told you before that the intro paragraph, right, and the conclusion paragraph are not CDW, okay? These are literally just introducing and concluding your essay, but it's the body paragraphs that will definitely be in CDW, DW format, okay? So let's go back to the intro paragraph. Now, on your outline worksheet, you already brainstormed an attention grabber, okay? And you also have a thesis statement, right? So really, all you really need to include are these pieces here, right? You want to make sure that if you have an attention grabber that is a quotation, you want to make sure you cite the source of that quotation or fact. Make sure if you are quoting a famous person that you give attribution, which means that you say who they are and what they're known for. All right, so the famous dramatist William Shakespeare once stated, and then give the quote, and then make sure at the end of the quote, right, that you cite your source, and this should also be cited on your works cited page. So keep that in mind. That's only for a quote. Specifically for this essay, I would suggest with the attention grabber something to do with the definition of a hero. Good. Now that you've already done the basic introductory paragraph, you can move on to your body paragraphs. And on the outline worksheet, you already have your claim, okay? And make sure that it does relate to the POD, right? Whatever you state first in your thesis, you want to make sure that's the first claim of your first body paragraph. Also on that outline, you have the data and evidence, preferably already cited in MLA format. If you haven't already done that, or if you needed a review, make sure that you look at the attachment, and I'll show you that in just a moment. But the thing that you do have to add here, right, is you have to have an introduction. And when you introduce your data, you want to make sure you're saying who is doing what and when. So is it Homer narrating Odysseus's adventures, right? Or is it Odysseus retelling the tale of the sirens, right? So make sure that you're giving a good introduction to your data so your audience who's already read the piece can really quickly bring their attention back to that part of the story, okay? And the big part that you need to include in your body paragraphs is the warrant. And you want to make sure you're interpreting and analyzing your data. And specifically, you want to look at, what actions of Odysseus are highlighted in your data. What words does he say? And then connect that back to your claim. How does his actions or those words reveal his heroism? Okay. And then again, you on your outline already have addressed the possible counter argument, and you've provided a rebuttal. So keep in mind that now you just have to smooth that paragraph out in whatever way flows best with your argument. Finally, in your last paragraph on the outline worksheet, you've already restated the thesis and preferably tied to your attention grabber. If not, make sure that you do include that in your conclusion paragraph. But also make sure that you transition, right? Say something like in conclusion. Okay. Make sure you do touch on the claims, right? Vary the language. And then make sure you give that sense of closure, right? That idea of why is it significant, right? What kind of insight did you gain from this reading and from this essay? And why is it important that we take away what it is that you've proven, okay? The last page will be your works cited page, which we'll go over here in just a minute, or with your rough draft edits. You are citing the Odyssey from the anthology, so it's very similar to citing a short story or another excerpt from our anthology like we've done before throughout this year. Let's see, the last thing that I have on this page is little reminders, right? Specifically with you guys, possessives seem to be an issue. When do you use a contraction? When don't you? So if you don't know that, make sure you look it up. It was definitely a blatant plague on your last essay for the poetry. So make sure that you check your possessives. Vary your sentence structure, right? Try to avoid run-ons and fragments. Combine sentences when you feel like you're repeating yourself and repeating terms. Avoid these first and second pronouns like the plague. You shouldn't have those in your paper. The intro and conclusion paragraphs are usually exempt from that, but try to avoid it at all costs if you can. I do not want to see this phrase, this quote shows, this data shows, this passage reveals. No. Do not use that phrase. Do not say talks about in your paper. Try to avoid indefinite pronouns where you don't really name specific people. Make sure that you're being clear. Like when you say someone, like who are you speaking about? Are you talking about the reader? Are you talking about, a Greek citizen? Anyone who's, studying? One who, studies the Odyssey. But be specific. Don't use contractions. What a pun there, right? But split them apart, right? Do not instead of don't. And then do not use past tense verbs, right? Take the word like wrote and convert it to the present tense, which is writes, okay? So that's a nice little checklist for you as you go through and develop your rough draft. And for those of you that really do love checklists, I went ahead and included one here for you. And literally the things that you've already put into your outline worksheet are highlighted here in pink. So all you really need to do is go ahead and add everything else that you've left out of that outline worksheet. Let's see here. Yeah, we got your claim. You've got this. You've got this. You definitely wrote out a counterclaim. You made either a direct quote or reference to data already existing. So you should be able to include that. You included a rebuttal, and you also had some sort of evidence for that. And then with the conclusion paragraph, it just depends on how much you included on that. But everything that's highlighted in pink is done. But the rest of it you have to add, and this is what really is the glue for your essay. So really take your time with this, go over the checklist, make sure that you're clear on what it is that you need to include. Finally, on this last page, I've given you examples of how to cite from the Odyssey. It is poetry, a narrative poem, and so it does follow those poetic device requirements, whether it's 3 lines or less or 4 lines or more. And you'll notice in these examples, I have an introduction to the data, and then I have an example of how do you cite, especially when Odysseus is speaking, 3 lines of poetry or less. You'll notice that I've got double quotes and then a single quote to show that Odysseus is speaking, okay? And a single quote and a double quote to close. My period is on the outside of my citation, which highlights the part, the book, and the lines. Well, down here, what I've done is I've given you an example of how to cite poetry that has 4 lines or more. I have my introduction to the data here. It's similar to what we had up here. I just expanded it a little bit to really show you how the two would look different. Now, Odysseus is still speaking here, so we do have quotes. If it was just narration with no one actually speaking, no dialogue, then there would not be quotes normally, but because he is speaking, we're going to include them. You'll notice that I've typed up the data verbatim, both with the words and the structure. So where one line ends, I hit enter and go down to the next line. You'll notice that all of the data is indented, 2 tabs or 10 spaces. The period is on the inside of the closing quotation marks, and the citation, again, is the part, the book, and the lines. Your warrant would begin all the way back at the margin, once again, to show that it is a full paragraph. I've got all of this information from OWL. There's information about when to use the dots of ellipses when you omit, whether it's words or several lines, so check that out. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. That's it. Enjoy writing your rough draft. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with.